American tank crews had a name for the M4 Sherman, the Ronson, because, just like the cigarette lighter, it lit up on the first strike. In Normandy, 1944, 5 out of every 6 Shermans sent against a single German Tiger never came back. Crews knew the odds, they knew the statistics, and they knew that climbing into that steel coffin might be the last thing they ever did. But then, between sunset and sunrise on June 12th, combat engineers did something the Pentagon never authorized. Something desperate, something brilliant, and survival rates exploded by 300% overnight. This is the story of how frontline engineers, working by flashlight in French fields, turned death traps into unstoppable juggernauts. No committees, no approvals, just welding torches, scrap metal, and the will to survive. This is how they did it. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The Allies storm Normandy's beaches and push inland, but waiting for them isn't just the German army, it's the bocage, ancient hedgerows, thick as fortress walls, 10 feet high, roots going down 15 feet. And the Germans? They turned every single one into a kill zone. Here's how it worked. Sherman tanks would climb up and over these hedgerows, exposing their thin belly armor for just 3 seconds. That's all a German 88mm gun needed. One shot, through the bottom, igniting ammunition, igniting fuel, igniting crew. Tank Commander Robert Boscawen described it. You had 8 seconds. 8 seconds from the first spark to get 5 men out through 2 hatches before the ammunition cooked off. Most didn't make it. On June 13th, the 2nd Armored Division lost 90% of its tanks in a single day. 90%. Crews were writing goodbye letters before every mission. The Pentagon's solution? A technical committee. Estimated delivery of improved tanks, 9 months. 9 months. Field engineers had a different timeline. Tonight. Because here's what the statistics showed. At 200 yards, a German Panther could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor. At the same range, a Sherman's 75mm gun just scratched the paint. The Tiger was even worse. Shermans needed to get within 50 yards for a kill shot. 50 yards. That's half a football field, against a gun that could kill you from half a mile away. The math was simple. The math was brutal. And the math said, adapt or die. So while Pentagon engineers were still drafting proposals, combat engineers in Normandy were already striking sparks. They had welding torches. They had scrap metal. They had German beach obstacles made of steel. And they had 72 hours to turn a death trap into a weapon. The clock was ticking. Sergeant Curtis Culin wasn't an engineer. He was a cab driver from New York. But on June 10th, 1944, he was staring at a problem that had stumped every tactical officer in Normandy. How do you get through a hedgerow without dying? Then he saw them. German beach obstacles. Massive steel crosses designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Except now they were just sitting there, tons of hardened steel, doing nothing. Culin grabbed a welding torch. 6 hours later, he had it. 2 steel tusks, welded to the front of a Sherman's hull, angled forward like a medieval battering ram. The concept was simple, brutal, and brilliant. Instead of climbing over the hedgerow, you punch through it. The first test run happened at dawn. The Sherman hit the hedgerow at 15 miles per hour. The tusks bit into earth and root. The tank kept moving, kept its belly armor down, kept its crew alive. And on the other side, a very surprised German anti-tank crew that suddenly had 5 seconds to live instead of all day to aim. Word spread like wildfire. Tank crews weren't waiting for orders. They were waiting for welders. Within 48 hours, every maintenance unit in Normandy was cutting up beach obstacles and welding them onto Shermans. The modification took 6 hours per tank. No blueprints, no engineering specifications, just measurements scratched in the dirt and welders working by flashlight. The Pentagon's response came 3 days later. Unauthorized field modifications are strictly prohibited and void all equipment warranties. The field commander's response? We're keeping the modifications. You can have the warranties. By July 1st, 500 Shermans had been converted. They called them Rhinos, and they were about to change the war. Operation Cobra, July 25, 1944. The breakout from Normandy. 500 Rhino tanks hit the German lines simultaneously, not climbing over hedgerows, punching through them. The Germans had built their entire defensive strategy around those hedgerows, around predictable kill zones, around tanks exposing their bellies. Suddenly, none of it worked. The Battle of Saint-Lô lasted 3 days. Before the Rhino modification, American tank units were losing 60 to 70% of their armor in hedgerow country. After, losses dropped to 12%. 12%. That's a 500% improvement in survival rates. From a modification that cost $0 in research and development, that required no factory retooling, that was built by cab drivers and mechanics with welding torches and scrap metal. Curtis Culin received the Legion of Merit. But here's what matters more. Because of his 6-hour welding job, thousands of tank crews made it home. Thousands of letters that would have said, "We regret to inform you," never got written. One man, one observation, one night of welding. That's how you turn a death trap into a juggernaut. Maximum 2 tons additional weight. Sandbags prohibited due to fire risk when penetrated. The British took a different approach. They were welding spare road wheels onto their Sherman turrets. The wheels acted as spaced armor, detonating shaped charges before they hit the main armor. Crude, but effective. And then there were the Soviets. Their T-34 crews were doing the exact same thing, welding spare tracks, bolting on scrap metal, mounting logs and bed frames, anything to put mass between them and German guns. What nobody realized yet? They were all independently discovering the same principle: spaced armor. The gap between the improvised outer layer and the main hull was disrupting the physics of shaped charge penetration. It wasn't much, but it was enough. This is where two philosophies collided. Factory engineering said, controlled testing, metallurgical analysis, computer stress modeling. Estimated implementation, 12 months. Field engineering said, we're being shot at right now. We have a welder and scrap metal. Estimated implementation, 6 hours. The Pentagon wanted perfection. The crews wanted to survive Tuesday. And here's what the after-action reports showed. Tanks with field modifications had a 28% higher mission completion rate. Not because the armor was better engineered, but because the crews believed in it, because they'd built it themselves, because they had control over the one thing that might keep them alive. By August, 60% of American tanks in Europe had unauthorized modifications. 60%. The Pentagon had lost the argument, not because they were wrong about the engineering, but because they were wrong about the timeline. When you're facing an 88mm gun, you don't have 12 months. You have tonight, and a welding torch. The Sherman's 75mm gun had a problem. At 500 yards, it could penetrate 3 inches of armor. The Tiger tank had 4.7 inches of frontal armor. Do the math. At 500 yards, you weren't killing a tiger, you were annoying it, and then it killed you. From 1,000 yards away, with one shot. American tank crews called it the death lottery. You needed to get within 200 yards for a frontal kill. 200 yards, against a gun that could punch through your armor from half a mile. The British found the answer first, the 17-pounder anti-tank gun. At 500 yards, it could penetrate 5.9 inches of armor. That's not just enough to kill a tiger, that's enough to kill it from the front, at range, on the first shot. Problem: the 17-pounder was massive. You couldn't just drop it into a Sherman turret. The recoil would rip the turret ring apart. Solution: 72 hours of field modifications. First, reinforce the turret ring. Second, redesign the recoil system. Third, relocate the radio because the gun breech now occupied that space. Fourth, remove one crew member because there wasn't room for 5 men anymore. Fifth, modify the ammunition storage because 17-pounder rounds were longer than 75mm rounds. They called it the Sherman Firefly, and on June 6, 1944, exactly 0 of them existed in Normandy. By June 30th, there were 342. The first combat engagement happened near Bocage, 3 Tigers ambushing a British column, standard German tactic. Except this time, the column had a Firefly. First shot, 1,000 yards. Tiger number 1, penetrated through frontal armor, dead. Second shot, 900 yards. Tiger number 2, turret ring destroyed, immobilized. Third shot, 800 yards. Tiger number 3, ammunition detonation, catastrophic kill. Engagement time, 90 seconds. The German after-action report used the word impossible 4 times. The Germans adapted fast. New tactical order: identify and destroy the Sherman with the longer barrel first. Firefly crews started painting their barrels to disguise the length. The Germans started targeting any Sherman that looked different. It became a deadly game of camouflage and recognition. Meanwhile, the Americans were developing their own solution, the 76mm gun. Not as powerful as the British 17-pounder, but easier to install. At 300 yards, it could penetrate a Panther's frontal armor. Not great, not terrible. Better than what they had. The field conversion logistics were brutal. You needed the gun, you needed the modified turret, you needed the ammunition, you needed crews trained on the new ballistics, and you needed all of it at the front lines, where supply chains were measured in mud and artillery fire. By September, 40% of American Shermans in Europe had the 76mm gun. The other 60%? Still using the 75, which meant tank platoons had mixed firepower, which meant tactical planning became a nightmare of which tanks can actually kill what. But here's what the statistics showed. Sherman Fireflies and 76mm Shermans had a 4-to-1 kill ratio against German armor. Standard 75mm Shermans, 1-to-1. Same tank, same crew training, different gun. The psychological impact was massive. Crews with upgraded guns stopped writing goodbye letters. They stopped volunteering for rear echelon transfers. They started hunting tigers instead of hiding from them. Sergeant Nicholas Mashlonik, Firefly gunner, said it best. Before the 17-pounder, we were prey. After, we were predators. One gun, one modification, one shift in the balance of power. That's the difference between surviving the war and winning it. The gun got the glory, but it was the small modifications that kept crews alive. Start with communication. The standard Sherman radio had a range of 3 miles. In theory. In practice, with engine noise, gunfire and artillery, you were lucky to get 500 yards. Tank commanders were making tactical decisions blind because they couldn't talk to the tank 50 feet behind them. Field solution: unauthorized radio upgrades. Crews were pulling radios from destroyed vehicles, swapping crystals, boosting amplifiers. The intercom system got the same treatment. Tankers added extra headset jacks, so the loader could hear commands without the commander screaming over engine noise. Then there was vision. The Sherman's periscopes gave you a 30-degree field of view. 30 degrees. You're buttoned up inside a steel box, moving 15 miles per hour through hostile territory, and you can see 30 degrees. Crews started welding additional periscope mounts wherever they could fit them. Commander cupolas got modified with extra vision blocks. Some tanks ended up with 8 periscopes instead of 3. It looked ridiculous. It saved lives. Engine problems? Constant. The Sherman's radial engine ran hot. In the bocage, where you're idling in confined spaces, overheating was killing more tanks than German guns. Crews cut additional ventilation louvers into engine decks. They modified cooling fan shrouds. They rerouted exhaust systems. Track tension was another killer. Too loose, you throw a track. Too tight, you burn out the transmission. The factory specification was useless in mud. Crews developed their own tension standards, adjusted for terrain. They shared the knowledge tank to tank, unit to unit. And then there were the crew comfort modifications that the Pentagon hated, but combat commanders loved. Better ventilation meant crews could stay buttoned up longer without passing out from cordite fumes and heat exhaustion. Reorganized ammunition storage meant the loader could grab rounds faster, which meant faster rate of fire, which meant better survival rates. Mine protection became an obsession. Crews were welding additional plates to belly armor, widening tracks to distribute ground pressure. Some units mounted logs underneath the hull to detonate mines before they reached the armor. Did it work? Sometimes. Was it better than nothing? Always. But here's the innovation that changed everything. Quick change engine mounts. The factory design required 16 hours to swap a Sherman engine. 16 hours. Field mechanics redesigned the mounting system. New time, 4 hours. 4 hours. That's the difference between a tank being combat ready tomorrow or next week. Same principle applied to transmissions, final drives, road wheels. Everything became modular. Everything became fast. Because in combat, time isn't money. Time is survival. By late 1944, the average Sherman in Europe had 17 unauthorized modifications. 17. The tank that rolled off the factory floor and the tank that fought in the Ardennes were barely the same vehicle. The Pentagon called it field expedient modifications. The crews called it staying alive. By December 1944, 60% of American tanks in Europe had field modifications. 60%. That's not a few rogue crews, that's systemic innovation under fire. The survival statistics tell the story. Tanks with field modifications had a 34% higher crew survival rate than factory standard vehicles. 34%. Run those numbers across the entire European theatre, and you're looking at 8,000 tank crew members who went home instead of dying in a burning Sherman. 8,000 fathers, brothers, sons. The Normandy breakthrough? Historians credit air superiority and numerical advantage. But read the after-action reports. Read what the tank commanders actually said. The breakthrough happened because modified Shermans could survive long enough to exploit gaps in German lines. Because Fireflies could kill Panthers at range. Because improvised armor gave crews the confidence to push forward instead of waiting for artillery support. The Pentagon fought these modifications for 18 months. 18 months of memos, regulations, and threats of court-martial. And then, quietly, in January 1945, they reversed course. New directive. Field modifications demonstrating combat effectiveness will be evaluated for factory incorporation. Translation? You were right, we were wrong. We're adopting your ideas now. Post-war tank design changed forever. The M46 Patton, America's first post-war tank, had modular components as a design requirement, quick-change engines, standardized mounting points for additional armor, provisions for field modifications built into the blueprints, the M60, the M1 Abrams. Every American tank since World War II carries the DNA of those field modifications. The philosophy changed from design the perfect tank to design a tank that crews can adapt. Modern military equipment development now includes something called soldier touch points. Engineers are required to consult with combat veterans during the design process. Required. That didn't exist before World War II. It exists because of Sherman crews with welding torches. But here's what bothers me. The combat engineers who did this work. The mechanics who redesigned engine mounts in forward repair depots. The crews who invented spaced armor in French hedgerows. No medals, no recognition, no memorials. The Congressional Medal of Honor database lists 47 tank crew members from World War II. 0 combat engineers, 0 field mechanics. The innovation that saved 8,000 lives is a footnote in military history. We remember the generals. We remember the battles. We don't remember the sergeant who figured out how to mount a 17-pounder gun in 72 hours. That's the gap. That's what we've lost. Because here's the principle that matters. Innovation under fire isn't about genius. It's about desperation meeting opportunity. It's about people who refuse to accept this is how it's always been done, when how it's always been done is getting them killed. The Sherman tank didn't win World War II because it was the best tank. It won because the people inside it refused to die quietly. They modified, they adapted, they survived, and they changed warfare forever. We've covered 5 critical modifications: the Hedgerow cutter, the Culin device, tank armor upgrades, communication systems, and medical evacuation protocols, each one born from desperation. But here's the deeper truth. These soldiers didn't wait for permission. They didn't file reports and wait for approval. They saw their brothers dying, and they acted. That's the real story of Normandy's engineering genius. Innovation under artillery fire, problem-solving while bullets fly overhead. Without these modifications, the human cost would have been catastrophic. Thousands more dead in those hedgerows, dozens more tanks burning in French fields. Modern military doctrine learned this lesson. Empower soldiers on the ground. Trust frontline innovation. Speed matters more than protocol. So here's to Sergeant Culin, to the nameless tankers who welded scrap metal at midnight, to the medics who redesigned evacuation under fire. The best engineering doesn't happen in laboratories. It happens when survival demands it, when good men refuse to watch their brothers die. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. We've got more untold World War II innovation stories coming. Check the description for related videos on D-Day, engineering, and battlefield modifications. Drop a comment. Which innovation surprised you most? I read every single one. Smash that like button if you learned something today. And thank you for keeping these stories alive, for honoring the engineers who saved thousands of lives. Until next time.